Yeah, it doesn't look like we have advanced much. And really, this is just a repeat of what went on in Germany and Berlin. Everybody says, oh, how could the Germans be so horrible after this was, how could they be involved in all of this Auschwitz and all of these horrible things? Everybody's doing it. I mean, now we got, the United States, we got nationalities from all over the world. And I'm going to show it's even going on in the IMF, the World Bank, and the UN. And that's international, and perfect experiment of how this is not, one nationality or one ethnic race or any of that over another. You give the same conditions. I don't care what the color is, the gender, whatever. You put the same narcissistic conditions and people in power, you're at the same results. So today I'm going to talk about the narcissism epidemic. This started at the 80s, and believe me, I have been on the front line of all of this, and I was even right there when the seed was planted with Nancy Reagan and my mom. She's been involved in this as well. And on the left, my former classmates of Foxcroft and my younger sister. So I'm going to read for a bit from here. The growing narcissism in American culture. We didn't have to look very hard to find it. It was everywhere. On a reality TV show, a girl planning her 16th birthday party wants a major road blocked off so a marching band can precede her grand entrance on a red carpet. A book called My Beautiful Mommy explains plastic surgery to young children whose mothers are going under the knife for the trendy mommy makeover. It is now possible to hire fake paparazzi to follow you around snapping your photos when you go out at night. You can even take home a faux celebrity magazine cover featuring the picture. A popular song declares with no apparent sarcasm, I believe that the world should revolve around me. People buy expensive homes with loans far beyond their ability to pay, or at least they did until the mortgage market collapsed as a result. On that, I've always said, the only difference between the poor people and the rich people is the poor people have a car that they can't afford, and the rich person has a jet or a yacht or a mansion that they can't afford. Everybody. I mean, in my entire life, everybody I almost know lives beyond their means. I mean, I'm never into debt. Even now, well, my landlord wouldn't agree with you there, but I will fight that in the courts. Anyway, I'll go on. Although these seem like a random collection of current trends, all are rooted in a single underlying shift of the American psychology, the relentless rise of narcissism in our culture. Not only are there more narcissists than ever, but non-narcissistic people are seduced by the increasing emphasis on material wealth, physical appearance, celebrity worship, and attention seeking. Standards have shifted, sucking otherwise humble people into the vortex of granite countertops, tricked out MySpace pages, and plastic surgery. A popular dance track repeats the word money, success, fame, glamour over and over again, declaring that all other values have either been discredited or destroyed. The United States is currently suffering from an epidemic of narcissism. What Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines an epidemic as an affliction affecting a disproportionately large number of individuals within a population, and narcissism more than fits the bill. In data from 37,000 college students, narcissism personality traits rose just as fast as obesity from the 1980s to present, with the shift especially pronounced for the women. The rise in narcissism is accelerating with scores rising faster in the 2000s than in the previous decades. So it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, let's see, nearly 1 out of 10 of Americans in their 20s and 1 out of 16 of those of all ages have experienced the symptoms of narcissism personality disorder. Even these shocking numbers are just the tip of the iceberg, lurking underneath the narcissism culture that has drawn in many more. The narcissism epidemic has spread to the culture as a whole, affecting both narcissistic and less self-centered people. Now, I fled Washington and the United States at the late 80s, and 80 would have been the beginning of 88. I came to Washington in 81 with all of these, I wanted to get into politics. I mean, this is what I wanted to do. I believed in our democracy. I was 17 years old. And I believed in all of the things that everybody had said at school about our democracy, about our Constitution, about our dedication to that Constitution. And I interned for former Senator Bennett Johnston from 81 until 85 when I left school. And, I left disgusted. It just was partying. I did a thesis on nuclear non-proliferation. And the thing that I found was the committees don't look at jack. So then I ended up in the financial markets and was there for the 87 collapse. So I was like, oh Lord, this just gets worse and worse. And that's when I packed my bags and I was like, I gotta regroup. I gotta figure out what I want to do with my life. I gotta figure out what's going on and everything. That's when I moved to Europe. So anyway, I saw this consumerism, materialism, narcissism move. It didn't follow me. I didn't bring it with me. I guess it just followed me. But throughout Europe and even into South America and all of because we were expats. So, my ex is French and Spanish and I'm American. So I was very much involved with the Hispanophone, the Francophone, and the Anglophone expat communities, which covers basically all nationalities. And I just saw it. And we really need to get rid of that. Now, in my last presentation, I talked to you about I'm going to take off my hat because it keeps on falling. I'll try and put it so you can see while I'm talking at least. So anyway, we had the Puritan movement, which was challenging Elizabeth I. Then you have the decay of the American dream here. Let me see. Whoops. So we've got, the same thing is going on today as it did before. And the Roaring Twenties, the Gilded Age, the Roaring Twenties, the Prohibition, the crash and everything like that. And that's what I go into here. I'll be posting this and some slides. And then you have, this is where I was talking about the seed of the narcissism epidemic with the whole debutante, the Debutante Guides to Life and how to be a debutante. I mean, you talk about your superficial living, got Martha's Vineyard, Palm Beach. I mean, this is what we aspire to. I mean, I never went to Martha's Vineyard or Palm Beach. My family didn't have the money for it, but I did, see what was going on with all of these girls. And I mean, it's just everybody aspiring to have a mansion and a jet. And that's not life. That leaves you empty. I've seen this so many times in my life with people. And they end up drugs and they end up in all sorts of problems and psychological problems and everything. It never has a good ending anywhere I've seen it. So anyway, this is Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan with the Queen Elizabeth II, just say no to drugs. I mean, well, my just say no to new Jim Crow. So anyway, it's just a repeat. It's just a repeat of we went through, about 100 years ago. Now here, I'm going to show you about the flappers. Come on.
Women were experiencing a new sense of freedom and independence in the 1920s. Who were these women? How did they express this newfound freedom? Women had gained the right to vote in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This amendment seemed to usher in the new decade, an era in which a new breed of liberated, modern woman became one of the most celebrated icons of the time. The new woman became known as a flapper. Flappers were young women who abandoned the traditional Victorian-era values of their parents and grandparents. The word flapper came from the United Kingdom. It was a slang term for an impetuous teenage girl. Flappers were known for a distinctive appearance and manner of dress. They cut their hair short, wearing a haircut known as a bobbed cut. They also wore straight, loose-fitting dresses with bare arms and low necklines. The dress length usually stopped just below the knee. At the time, such a short dress or skirt would have been considered risque. This allowed the young women to perform new dance steps such as the Charleston or the shimmy. When dancing, the length of their dresses would allow for an occasional glimpse of the bare knees, which would have been scandalous just a decade before. Large amounts of jewelry also made up part of the flapper costume. Several layers of beaded necklaces, pins, rings, and brooches were also common. Flappers typically wore large amounts of makeup, including lipstick, eyeliner, and blush. Makeup became increasingly more common throughout the decade as manufacturers continued to make a wider variety of cosmetics. Stockings also went out of fashion, and many older women were shocked when they saw young flappers out in public with bare legs. However, being a flapper was more than just a choice of clothing and jewelry. It was a way of life. The flappers engaged in many different types of behavior that, at the time, were not deemed as ladylike. They rode bicycles, drove automobiles, listened to jazz music, smoked cigarettes, drank alcohol, and danced. There were many slang terms that became associated with the flapper culture. Terms such as
So anyway,
the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas.
As you can see, this is pretty much what we went through as well. I mean, the cosmetic stuff, my goodness, how many people can come up with cosmetics? And it's all the socialite and everything like that, and I mean, every time I turn around, somebody got some new cosmetic product, and my favorite is like, oh, and the cheap, I only buy the cheap one, it's $400. I'm like, you people are freaking crazy. I mean, I have very sensitive skin. The only soap I can use is Aveeno soap. I'm not promoting it or anything. And I think when I started using it back in the 70s, it cost me like $1.50 or something like that. Now I pay maybe $4.50 for it or something like that. But I mean, that and, the oils, any kind of coconut oil. I do all sorts of almond oil and stuff like that to hydrate. That's it. That's it. I mean, if I use any of those products and everything like that, oh my God, I'm scratching and scratching away all day long. I mean, it's ridiculous. Nobody needs that. I mean, I'm 57 years old, and people say I look pretty good for my age, and considering all the stress I've been through in the past 15 years, I think that's pretty good. But I mean, just this is one of the things that really bothers me about the World Bank and the IMF and the UN and promoting all of this stuff and promoting all of, women's rights and putting money in the hands of women is going to liberate, and it goes to food and clothes for the children and everything like that. Yes, when you're dirt poor and all of a sudden you got a little bit of money, you know, you're going to feed your kids first. But when you get to a certain level of comfort in society, you see it all over the place. The women, and even they stop caring about the kids. It's like, oh yeah, they got food, they got a nanny. Don't even get me started on the nannies. Yeah, so this whole idea of getting money into the pockets of women. I mean, Christine Lagarde, that's one of the people who really pisses me off about this whole thing. We'll see that later on with her in her interviews. But, you know, no, women, when they get to a certain level of comfort and social status, they spend all their money on, I mean, clothes. You've seen some of the clothes. When I got back to the States, I needed a pair of sandals, a new pair of sandals. So I went online and I tried to find, you know, something that's not too high or whatever. And I mean, I came across stuff $1,500 on sale for a pair of sandals that, you know, stiletto heels that, okay, I can see Elton John wearing on stage back in the 70s. But what person in their right mind would spend that kind of money and put that thing on their foot? Another one of my pet peeves is your 4 or 5 inch heels. I'm like, this is Chinese feet binding. I would love for you men to try and put on those shoes for just 1 block. You don't even go 5 steps, I'll give you, and say, no, you people are crazy. So, I mean, we're just doing a repeat. It's just a repeat. And believe me, I know them all. And I'm angry with them all. Because they're all looking down their noses at me as, you know, we're too busy to bother ourselves with the problems of the world. You're not going to be too busy when the raping and pillaging starts in your homes. Believe me. So, now I want to go to the prohibition. And you know, same thing has happened to the war on drugs. Okay? So listen to this.
Pardon me, friend. Have you been drinking alcohol?
Well, if this is the case, then that's completely fine. If you're in the United States, you're of the right age, and you're not, you know, operating heavy machinery or at work. Welcome to Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. This week, Scully, Matt, and I are looking at prohibition because, as you probably know, if you look at the history of the United States, alcohol was not always legal. In 1919, Congress ratified the 18th Amendment banning the manufacture, transit, and importation of alcohol, and this went into effect in 1920. The United States was theoretically a completely dry country. Advocates of this plan saw alcohol as a
Moral threat, and without the crippling abuses of this demon drink, there's no telling what this great nation could do.
They predicted that without alcohol, you know, flooding the streets, that crime would go down. They predicted that the public health would be better and moral character, whatever that was supposed to mean at the time. We know, of course, that Congress agreed, right, and they passed the amendment, and we know that in 1933, Congress and most of the nation decided they were wrong, and alcohol was legal again, and has been ever since. However, this strange experiment in morality and public health didn't disappear in 1933. In fact, prohibition left the United States with several long-term serious effects which continue in the modern day. Here are 3. Number 1, prohibition was massively expensive.
War on drugs?
Expensive. Picture a number in your head. No, more than that. Like proportionately more than that. In a day and age where the average Ford factory worker made $5 a day, that was good money back then, prohibition cost $300 million just to enforce. But there were other hidden costs too, aside from, you know, just the cost of G-men salaries to go bust bootleggers. And one of those biggest costs was tax revenue. On a national level, the United States lost $11 billion of tax revenue between 1920 and 1933 just because of prohibition. And this has an interesting effect too that I'll get to in a second, because the next hidden cost was the thousands of jobs that people lost. Now, advocates of prohibition had painted a somewhat optimistic is literally the nicest word we can use. They painted an optimistic picture of life in a dry America. And what they said was, well, without people spending all of their money on booze, several things will happen. They said sales of other goods and products will shoot up. So, bubble gum, soda pop, stuff like that. They said that property prices would rise, landlords would make more in rent because bars would close down, and the neighborhoods would become safer, more desirable places to live. Funny story, none of that happened. What actually happened was much worse. We mentioned those thousands of people who lost their job. Well, they weren't just brewers, they weren't just distillers, they weren't just guys driving around a booze delivery van or whatever. They were also waiters at restaurants across the nation that closed because without a liquor license, they were not profitable. There were also people who worked in the entertainment industry, movies, live shows, dance clubs, who also closed. And here is maybe the most immediate way this affects you if you live in the United States today. Because what did states do to make up for all this lost tax revenue in a prohibition world? Income tax, my friend.
Income tax.
Prohibition may be one of the reasons that you, depending upon the state in which you live, pay the amount of income tax you do today. But money isn't everything, right? That's the thing people always say is like, oh, at least you have your health, which brings us to number 2, public health. Well, as you could see, prohibition was successful in that it reduced drinking rates for people. Not a lot of people are going to go out and start stumbling through a black market to find one shot of Evan Williams or Four Roses or whatever they were drinking at the time. But despite this, people did die from alcohol consumption. Actually, a lot more people died consuming illegal alcohol than would have if prohibition never happened. And maybe they got off lucky, because if you didn't die, you still had a chance of being paralyzed or struck blind, which sounds positively biblical, from drinking tainted alcohol. Because it's not like you couldn't find alcohol, you just weren't supposed to find it. Oh, and one other thing, interesting fact, at the end of Prohibition, there were more alcoholics than there were at the beginning of Prohibition. So if we're talking about how to find illegal alcohol, this leads us to number 3, and maybe one of the biggest lasting effects of the Prohibition policies of the 20s, and that is the rise of organized crime. The Dick Tracy days, the Untouchables versus Al Capone, the Kennedy family, allegedly. We have to say allegedly at that part. But the rise of organized crime was unprecedented. Imagine the advocates of fighting this moral panic called alcohol. They said that crime would decrease. But that is the opposite of what happened. Crime increased, including violent crime, because these people found such a lucrative financial opportunity smuggling alcohol, manufacturing alcohol, owning different pharmacies or speakeasies where they could peddle it to the public. And with so much money in play, law enforcement wasn't able to fight it as well as you might think. In fact, law enforcement was often in on the game. Not just local law enforcement, not just the cops. The judges too. Not just the judges, but also, the state legislature members. Well, not just them, but also people in Congress. You see where we're going with this. The massive amounts of money generated by organized crime's alcohol industry, which, if you remember, already had a pre-existing infrastructure from back when it was legal. This stuff poured into law enforcement and gave rise to organized corruption. And the fortunes that were made in this trade changed the economic face of the United States. So what we find when we look at Prohibition is that in this time, there were so many actual conspiracies, not conspiracy theories, actual groups of people working together in secret to break the law and to make money off of it. And of course, that leads us to one of the most important points for some of you watching today, and that is, did Prohibition end? Well, yes, Prohibition of alcohol ended, But prohibition as a practice continues today, not just in the United States, but in other countries. Of course, you are probably most familiar with the prohibition of marijuana, which is slowly eroding on a state-by-state basis. And we have to look back at the historical context here to ask ourselves what lessons learned from prohibition of alcohol can be applied to the prohibition of marijuana.
So, I mean, I don't want to get into the marijuana discussion right now, but one of the things, I mean, he's right. One of the problems with the alcohol, when you had prohibition, you know, there's still going to be a demand. Still going to be a demand. So of course, it is much more profitable to transport a gallon of pure grain alcohol, or the highest you can get, than beer. I mean, you're taking basically the kind of same risk. So what happened was you no longer had, the beer or the wine and all of the lighter alcohols. Everybody, basically what you could get was the hard stuff. And also a lot of this stuff was made, in some Virginia mountains or something. There was no control. So, all sorts of crap. I mean, this is a short version. I looked at a long documentary on this. So all sorts of crap was put in that stuff. I mean, and we have the same thing with cocaine and even the marijuana. I mean, they were putting all sorts of stuff. I remember the stories about, oh no, the cocaine's cut and so it's not that bad. I'm like, what the hell are they putting in there? What is it cut with? You guys don't know what you're putting in your bodies? And then people were smoking and with all of the what was it? They put angel dust, I guess it was called. And believe me, I smoked marijuana and everything like that, but for me, it's a whole different ball game than heroin and cocaine, and even cocaine. When I went to Peru, to Machu Picchu, they gave us cocoa leaves, they gave us mate, because with the altitude, you get a headache. And so you take it. The Peruvians and a lot of the people who live in the high altitudes in South America, they would chew the cocoa leaves, and it would help with the altitude. Well, a cocoa leaf, of course, is not like a line, because what they do is they take it and then they concentrate it and concentrate it and concentrate it to this very, very harmful drug. So most of the, any kind of the drugs, and there's a lot of natural drugs out there. I mean, the poppies, I remember poor people who had been heroin addicts, they couldn't even eat a poppy seed bagel because they would test positive. Oh, my Lord, you people. So anyway, it's just a repeat. So let's see the next one that I have. Oh, and here. Let's see. Let me play this first before I read. This is a socialite. And what the socialite life is about.
It's sort of like a mockery in a way of reality, because they think everything is smiles and sweetness and flowers when there is something bitter to taste. And to pretend there isn't is foolish. And the ones that wander around and know at the same time, and yet wear flowers, and they deserve to wear flowers.
If they know, then they don't wear flowers.
There's a difference. You can tell by people's eyes.
Yeah, so most people I know a lot of rich people and they're all pigs.
I know a lot of rich people and they're all pigs. That's what she said.
And that's your grandma. Do wear hair.
Well, I was Girl of the Year and a superstar, and I was very upset that two of my brothers had committed suicide, two that I loved very much. it kind of screwed up my head. So
That's what
I
this
just
life does to
freaked out
people.
for a while.
Oh, I don't know. Honestly, I must be out of my head. I can't remember that.
Well, you're that level, I mean.
I don't know what you... What do you... Why would I say what?
These little maneuvers I did out of things that were happening in my life that upset me, and I'd freak out in a very physical way. I must say I liked the introduction to drugs I received. I was a good target for the scene. I blossomed into a healthy young drug addict. Yeah, well, I must have tripped out a few times in a few earlier lives.
You think we're given more than one chance?
Well, and maybe another whole set of circumstances. Different things to contend with. I just believe that